All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You guys sent in tons of stuff this week, and it's all about this whole nobody wants to work anymore thing. Like, it's everywhere, right? So
Right.
what's the deal? Is it just a bunch of complaining, or is something bigger going on? That's what we're going to figure out. Just glancing over the stuff you sent in, I saw some pretty wild things. You've got Gen Z saying they need to make like $600,000 a year to feel successful, and then boomers thinking 100,000 is like making it big. Plus, there's this whole thing about West Virginia and their workforce numbers looking totally different from everywhere else. So yeah, lots to unpack. Thankfully, we've got our expert here with us to like help us make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's definitely not as simple as just saying everyone's lazy, right? There's a ton of stuff happening all at once, like the economy changing, different generations with different ideas about work, and maybe some people actually are changing how they think about working.
Okay, so let's start with those crazy salary expectations. One article talked about this survey, right? And Gen Z is saying they won't feel successful unless they're pulling in something like $600,000 a year. I mean, that's insane, right? Boomers would think they'd won the lottery with that much.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge difference. But before we just write off a whole generation as entitled, we got to think about what it's like for them now. I mean, the
Hmm.
cost of living is insane these days, especially in the big cities where all these fancy jobs are.
Yeah, good point. And then you've got student loans on top of that. It's like they're starting out already buried in debt.
Exactly. I mean, the average student loan debt is over $37,000 now. That's a huge weight to be carrying when you're just starting out.
So maybe that 600,000 isn't about being rich, but just about being able to like actually survive.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. It's about wanting some stability, you know you can pay your bills and stuff, especially with everything costing so much these days.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you've got all these articles saying companies are being super cheap and offering terrible working conditions. So is it just a case of both sides being unrealistic, like Gen Z wanting too much and companies offering too little?
I mean, it's easy to just say it's like a generational war or something,
Mm.
but it's more complicated than that,
Yeah.
right? Sure, sometimes people have unrealistic expectations and sometimes companies take advantage of people, but we need to look at the bigger picture too, like what's happening with the economy overall.
You mean like how wages haven't really gone up in forever, but everything costs way more?
Exactly. If you adjust for inflation, most people are actually making less now than they did 40 years ago.
Wow, really?
Yep. So when you see young people asking for these huge salaries, it's not always about being greedy. It's about trying to keep up with how expensive it is to live.
Right, makes sense. And it's not just about the money either. A lot of the stuff you sent in talked about how jobs don't have good benefits anymore, or there's no job security. And some people even said they just don't feel respected at work.
That's a really good point. Work itself is definitely changing. You see more gig work now, or contract stuff, where you don't get the benefits and stability of a traditional job. It makes people feel insecure, like they can't plan for the future.
Yeah, it's like that whole work hard, get a good job, have a comfortable life thing isn't true anymore.
You got it. Things are changing, and we're all trying to figure out how to adapt.
So, okay, we've got people wanting different things, the economy's changing, and everything costs more. But what do the actual numbers say? Like, how many people are actually working or looking for work?
Okay, so that's where it gets interesting. It's true that overall, fewer people are working or looking for work compared to a few decades ago.
Hmm.
But if you just look at people who are like middle-aged, not too young, not too old, the numbers are pretty high.
Huh, interesting. So what's going on with the younger and older folks then?
Let's start with the older workers, shall we?
Sure. One thing I noticed was a lot of people talking about early retirement. Like people are living longer and healthier, but it seems like more of them are deciding to stop working before the usual retirement age.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend. There are a few things driving that, like a lot of older workers have seen their houses go up in value, or they've done well in the stock market, so they have more money to retire earlier.
Right. And didn't the pandemic change things too? Like people rethinking what's important to them?
Definitely. For a lot of people, the pandemic was like a wake-up call. They realized they didn't want to spend the remaining years stuck in a job they hated.
So it's less about being lazy and more about wanting to enjoy their lives.
Exactly. They've worked their whole lives, and now they want some freedom.
Totally makes sense. But what about the younger generation? Why aren't they jumping at the chance to fill those open jobs?
Well, a few things are happening there. Remember how we talked about education costing more? Well, a lot of young people are just still in school trying to get the qualifications they need for today's job market.
So it's not that they don't want to work, they're just not ready yet.
Yep. And that longer time in school means more student loans, too. It's kind of a catch-22.
And then there's that whole thing with ghost jobs, right? Like jobs that look real but then disappear.
Oh, yeah, that's a big problem. I've heard stories about people applying for hundreds of jobs and never even getting a call back. It's super discouraging, especially when you're just starting out and already facing so many hurdles.
Yeah, that sounds rough. So it's not just about having any degree. You need the right degree, the right skills, the right connections.
That's it. Jobs are more specialized now, so you really got to know yours.
Okay, so we've got this whole mix of things going on. Industries disappearing, places being more expensive than others, education costing a fortune. It's not just about lazy workers, it's a whole system that's making things tough. But what about the people who don't have a choice? Like people in places where there just aren't any jobs. What happens to them?
That's a really important question, and it brings us to our next stop on this deep dive, West Virginia.
All right, West Virginia. This is where things get interesting. If we really want to understand this whole nobody wants to work thing, we got to look beyond the headlines and see what's really happening on the ground.
Exactly, and West Virginia is the perfect place to do that.
Okay, so West Virginia, right. They always seem to be at the bottom of the list when it comes to people working, but I'm guessing it's not as simple as everyone just being lazy.
Oh, definitely not. West Virginia is actually a really good example of why this whole lazy worker thing is so misleading. They consistently have the lowest rate of people working or looking for work in the whole country. But if you just blame that on people not wanting to work, you're missing the whole picture.
Okay, so what is the whole picture then? What's really happening in West Virginia?
Well, for a long time, their economy was built on things like coal mining and manufacturing, right? Those jobs paid pretty well and supported a lot of families.
Right, I've heard about that.
But over time, those industries started shrinking. Automation, globalization, and the shift away from coal all played a part.
So it's not that people suddenly didn't want to work, it's that the jobs just disappeared.
Exactly. And a lot of places in West Virginia are still struggling to recover. They have high unemployment and not a lot of new opportunities.
I can see how that would be really tough.
And here's the thing, it's not even the same across the whole state. Some counties have way more people working than others. It's like some parts are doing okay, while others are really struggling.
Wow, that's crazy. Why is it so different within the same state?
It depends on what industries were in each area. Like the places that were really dependent on coal mining have been hit the hardest.
Makes sense.
And it's not always easy for people to just pick up and move, right?
Yeah, moving is expensive. Plus, you've got family, friends, your whole life in one place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a tough decision. Stay in a place you love, but where there aren't many jobs, or move somewhere new and start over. Makes you wonder if this is happening all over the country, right?
Yeah, like are we seeing this divide between a few really successful cities and then a lot of rural areas that are struggling?
That's definitely something a lot of people are worried about. There's this idea of a winner-take-all economy, where all the good jobs and money are concentrated in just a few big cities.
And then everyone else is kind of left behind.
Right, and it creates this vicious cycle. The more opportunities there are in those big cities, the more people move there. And that leaves even fewer people and resources in the places that are already struggling.
It's like two different versions of America almost.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it leads to a lot of frustration and resentment, especially for people who feel like the system is rigged against them.
So we were talking about finance and tech being seen as like escape routes, right?
Yeah, for a while, it seemed like if you could get a job in Silicon Valley or on Wall Street, you were set for life.
But it sounds like even those paths are getting harder now.
Yeah, it's still true that those jobs pay really well,
Yeah.
but it's also way more competitive now. I read an article about how even computer science grads from top schools like Berkeley are having trouble finding jobs.
Really?
Yeah.
Berkeley. That's crazy. What's going on?
Well, a few things. More people are getting degrees in those fields now, so there's more competition. Plus, technology changes so fast that the skills you need are constantly evolving.
So it's not enough to just have a degree anymore. You have to be constantly learning and keeping up with everything.
That's right. And companies are getting pickier, too.
Yeah.
They want people with very specific experience and skills.
So it's like you need the right degree, the right skills, and the right connections all at the same time.
Basically. And that's led to this thing called credential inflation.
Credential inflation, what's that?
It's the idea that as more people get degrees, those degrees become less valuable. So employers start asking for even more qualifications, like a master's degree or even a PhD.
So it's like this race to the top where the finish line keeps moving further away.
Exactly. And it has a couple of big consequences. First, it means people spend more time in school before they can start working. And second, it makes education even more expensive because schools know people are willing to pay more for those advanced degrees.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The harder it is to get a job, the more education you need, which makes it even harder to get a job.
That's it. And it's especially tough for people who don't have a lot of money to start with. They might not be able to afford those extra years of school, or they might already have a ton of debt.
It's like the system is working against them.
It's a valid point,
Yeah.
and it highlights the need for some big changes to make things fairer.
Okay, so we've got all these things happening, industries disappearing, cost of living going up, education becoming more expensive and competitive. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but I think the most important takeaway is that this nobody wants to work idea is just too simple.
Right, it's not about laziness, it's about a whole bunch of factors that are making it harder for people to work.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
if we want to find solutions, we need to start talking about the real problems, not just blaming people.
Okay, so if it's not about lazy workers, what does it mean for the future of work? Like, what are the solutions? That's a big question, right? If it's not about people being lazy, then what do we do? What's the next step?
I think the first thing is to just admit that it's complicated, you know?
Hmm.
We can't just blame people or point fingers. We have to look at the whole system and see what's really going on.
Okay, so what can we actually do about it? What are some solutions?
Well, one big thing is education and training. We got to make sure people have the skills that employers are actually looking for.
Right, like not everyone needs a 4-year college degree.
Exactly. There are tons of good jobs that don't require a traditional degree.
Yeah, like the trades, right?
Exactly. But
Yeah.
we need to make sure people know about those options and how to get the training they need.
And it has to be affordable, right? I mean, college is so expensive these days, it's not even an option for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a huge barrier. We need to find ways to make education and training more affordable, whether it's through scholarships, loan forgiveness, or even changing how we fund education altogether.
Okay, so education is key. What else?
Another big one is infrastructure.
Infrastructure, like roads and bridges and stuff.
Yeah, but also things like energy grids, internet access, all those things that businesses need to operate. Investing in infrastructure creates jobs directly, but it also makes it easier for businesses to grow and create even more jobs.
So it's like creating a good foundation for the economy to grow.
Exactly. And this is especially important for rural areas that are struggling.
Mm,
If you improve the infrastructure, you make those areas more attractive to businesses, and that can bring in new jobs and revitalize the whole community.
that makes sense. So we've got education, infrastructure, anything else,
Well, we also need to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship.
like starting new businesses.
Exactly. Because a lot of the jobs that are going to exist in the future haven't even been invented yet.
So we need to create an environment where people can come up with new ideas and build new things.
That's it. And that means supporting research and development, making it easier for small businesses to get started, and cutting back on unnecessary regulations.
So it's like creating a culture where it's okay to take risks and try new things.
Yeah, we need people to feel empowered to be creative and come up with solutions.
Okay, I like it. But throughout this whole conversation, I keep thinking about the bigger picture. Like, we talked about how the old ideas about work are changing. People are questioning what it means to have a good job, a successful life, all that stuff.
You're right, that's a really important point. The nature of work is changing, and our values and expectations are changing too. We need to have a serious conversation about what we want work to look like in the future.
Yeah, like, do we want to keep working longer and longer hours, or do we want to prioritize things like free time and family?
Exactly. It's not just an economic question. It's a question about our values as a society.
Wow, that's deep. But you know what? I'm actually feeling optimistic. It seems like we're finally starting to have these conversations. We're not just accepting the old ways of doing things, we're actually questioning them and looking for better solutions.
I agree. It's an exciting time to be thinking about the future of work. There are definitely challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities to make things better.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We've learned a lot today about why this whole nobody wants to work thing isn't the whole story. And we've explored some really interesting ideas about how to create a better future of work.
It's been a great conversation.
And if you want to keep learning and exploring these ideas, make sure to check out our newsletter. We've got tons of great stuff in there to keep you thinking and keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.